Hey there! Let me tell you about a mess of a situation. My wife had an affair with a Hollywood director, lied to me for 7 years about our daughter, and then had the audacity to pin the blame on me. But to really explain how we got here, let me start from the very beginning. I'm 32 now, and she's 30. We've actually known each other for a long time, since we went to the same school back in the day. There was always this unspoken connection between us, but neither of us ever made a real move. It was like this mutual crush that never quite turned into anything. Once in a while, we'd notice each other, exchange smiles, or say hello on our birthdays, but that was as far as it went. Then, a few years ago, everything changed. I left a comment on one of her photos online, and that sparked a conversation. I could tell right away that she was interested, and I wasn't about to let the opportunity slip by this time. I got her phone number quickly, and that same night, we ended up talking on the phone for 4 hours straight. It was like we couldn't run out of things to say. Not long after, I asked her out. Our first date was at a little cafe. She showed up looking nervous, her cheeks a little flushed, and there was this endearing awkwardness about her. I reached over at one point, held her hands gently, and even gave them a light massage. She didn't pull away. In fact, she seemed to enjoy the attention. Our second date was even better. We strolled around town, and she opened up more about her life. She told me she'd been sick recently, and dealing with bad headaches. She also mentioned she'd been seeing a therapist for the past year to try and get her life on track. Then she shared this strange story about a friend of hers who, after taking some medication prescribed by a psychologist, suddenly realized she was married. By the third date, I thought I had a pretty good read on her. But then, just as we were wrapping up the night, she hit me with something I didn't see coming. "Remember that friend I told you about, the one who got married on medication?" she asked. "Yeah, sure," I said. "Well, that friend was me." For a moment, I just froze. My brain was trying to process what she just said. Then I told myself, whatever. Let's not make a big deal out of it. So I didn't push for details. She explained that she'd been married for 2 years and was still living with her husband, but things weren't great between them. She said the relationship was falling apart. According to her, he'd become distant, emotionally withdrawn, and uninvested. They didn't have kids, and she felt like they were just going through the motions. Soon after, our relationship took a turn toward the physical. She started staying over at my place, and it became a regular thing. After one of our nights together, I even drove her back to the house she shared with her husband. It felt surreal, to say the least. On our fourth date, things escalated. We had a couple of drinks, and I took her to a small apartment I'd rented just for us. She seemed nervous, and I watched her call her husband, telling him she was spending the night at a friend's place. That was the night we slept together for the first time. The next morning, she left for work looking a little unkempt but still stunning. Because I lived about 60 miles away from her, every time we met, I'd rent a place. We fell into this routine of meeting 2 or 3 times a week. We'd grab dinner, talk about everything under the sun, and then head back to the apartment, where the nights would always end the same way. What drew me to her wasn't just the physical connection. She was smart, articulate, and cultured. She loved reading classic literature and watching thought-provoking films. She had this passion for jazz and could talk about famous directors and musicians with such depth it blew my mind. She had this refined, sophisticated way about her that I found intoxicating. But something about the situation nagged at me. She'd leave my place and head back home to sleep in the same bed as her husband. She said she couldn't stand him, that everything he did annoyed her, and that she was just trying to keep up appearances. She admitted she didn't want to deal with the hassle of people asking questions about their relationship. One day, she casually mentioned she'd even changed her last name to her husband's. That struck me as odd. If you got married on medication, how'd you manage to go through all the effort of changing your name on every official document? That's not something you just accidentally do, I said. She fumbled for an answer but couldn't give me anything that made sense. That was the first time I started questioning whether she was being entirely honest with me. When she told me she was pregnant, my mind went blank for a moment. I wasn't sure what to say, how to react. Part of me felt this strange, almost surreal sense of pride. Could it be mine? But then, reality crept in. The timelines didn't match up neatly in my head. I did some mental math, going over the past few months of our meetings, trying to piece together when it could have happened. The truth was, it could be mine. We'd spent so many nights together, and our connection had been so intense. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the other possibility. She had admitted to still being with her husband, even if she claimed their intimacy was rare. How rare was rare? I didn't want to ask outright, not yet anyway. Instead, I tried to keep things casual, to see if she'd offer any clues. "Do you know how far along you are?" I asked, hoping her answer might help clear things up. She looked at me, a little hesitant. "Not exactly," she said. "The doctor thinks about 6 or 7 weeks. 6 or 7 weeks. That didn't narrow things down much. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a foggy abyss. I wanted it to be mine, needed it to be mine, but I also couldn't shake this gnawing doubt. She seemed calm, almost unnervingly so. If she was worried about the baby's paternity, she didn't show it. In fact, she didn't bring it up at all. She just carried on, as though everything between us was perfectly normal. But then there was this one moment that stuck with me, a tiny crack in her composure. We were sitting together, talking about the pregnancy, when she suddenly said, almost to herself, "I hope he doesn't suspect anything." I froze. "Who?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She blinked, like she hadn't meant to say it out loud. "No one," she said quickly, brushing it off. "It's nothing." It wasn't nothing, though. That one slip made my stomach churn. Who was she talking about? Her husband? Me? Both of us? The doubt started eating away at me. I found myself analyzing her every word, every gesture. Was she hiding something? Did she know who the father was and just wasn't telling me? A few weeks later there was a moment that finally tipped the scales. She called me, her voice shaky. "I need you to drive me to the clinic," she said. "They want to do some additional tests." "Of course," I said, not thinking twice. When I picked her up, she was holding a piece of paper, a lab form. She tried to tuck it into her bag, but I caught a glimpse of the name at the top, her husband's. She must have seen the confusion on my face because she quickly said, "Oh, it's just the insurance paperwork. They always use the policyholder's name." But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. It felt too rehearsed, too convenient. My gut told me that she wasn't telling me everything. Later that night, as I lay in bed, the pieces started clicking into place. If she was going through all this under her husband's name, if she hadn't told him yet, maybe she didn't need to tell him because deep down, she believed the baby was his. And just like that, the doubt I'd been suppressing came roaring to life. Things began to shift after the pregnancy news. She started pulling back, acting distant. One night, out of nowhere, she said she wasn't sure she wanted to continue with us. It hit me like a punch to the gut. I tried to reason with her, but she was insistent. "I just need time to think," she said, her voice firm but distant. I couldn't let it end like that. I went over to her place uninvited one evening, determined to talk it through. When I got there, she was drinking wine with a friend, laughing and acting like everything was fine. It was like she'd erased the tension from before, but there was still this wall between us. All night she kept saying things like, "I don't need this right now," her tone dismissive. She said it so many times it felt rehearsed. I sat there, trying to keep calm, swallowing every hurtful word. But inside I was breaking. The next morning, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I sent her a long text, pouring out my thoughts, my frustration, my confusion. Her response surprised me. She apologized, saying she'd been overwhelmed and hadn't known how to handle everything. After that, things seemed to settle. She decided to move out of her husband's house and into her own apartment. At first, I felt relieved, finally, a step in the right direction. But then I found out something that nearly tore me apart. Her husband had helped her move. I only discovered this by chance. One day, I was visiting her new place, and there was this bookshelf in the corner, perfectly assembled. When I casually asked if she'd put it together, she hesitated for just a second too long. "Oh, my ex helped with that," she said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Your ex?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Well, technically my husband. I mean, my former husband," she corrected herself. The way she said it made my skin crawl. She moved into her own place, yes, but they were still in each other's lives, closer than I wanted to believe. As time went by, I began to notice something odd. She wasn't just in touch with her ex-husband. She seemed to have a habit of staying close with all of her exes. It bugged me enough that I finally asked her outright one day, "Why do you keep in touch with these guys?" She gave a small shrug, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "It's just how I am," she said. "I don't believe in cutting people out of my life. Each of them has been a part of my journey, and they've shaped me in different ways. There was one ex, though, that really got under my skin. He wasn't just some casual boyfriend from her past, he was her old philosophy professor. She'd lived with him for years before her marriage, and from the way she talked about him, it was clear he held a special place in her life. She'd even called him the most influential person she'd ever known, someone she felt deeply indebted to. And here's the kicker, they still met up. Once a month, like clockwork. She swore to me it was nothing more than catching up. "He's practically family," she said, as if that explained everything. But every time they met, it ended the same way. He'd say something that tore her down, leaving her in tears. She'd come home a wreck, only to go back for more the next month. One night, after watching her return from one of these meetings, looking completely shattered, I hit my breaking point. I'd had enough. When his name popped up on her phone later that evening, I told her, "If he calls again, I'm going to send him a message myself." She didn't react the way I expected. She didn't defend him or tell me to stay out of it. Instead, she just sat there, quiet, like she was waiting for me to do it. It was maddening. Her silence was almost worse than an argument. After a long pause, she finally said, "He doesn't mean anything to me anymore. There's no romance, no intimacy, nothing like that. He's just part of my past." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But no matter how much I tried to push it aside, the doubt kept creeping back, gnawing at me like a bad itch I couldn't scratch. It was sometime around 3 o'clock in the morning when I heard the knock. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of the night, it might as well have been a thunderclap. I jolted awake, heart pounding, and stumbled to the door. Half asleep, I swung it open to find her standing there. She looked wrecked. Her coat was hastily thrown on, and she was clutching a small bag in one hand like it was the only thing holding her together. Her eyes shimmered with tears that hadn't quite fallen, making her look both fragile and determined at the same time. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, stepping aside without saying a word. She walked in slowly, like the weight of whatever she was carrying inside her was almost too much to bear. She settled on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, twisting nervously. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do, before sitting down across from her. She didn't speak right away. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. Then, finally, she looked up at me, her voice trembling as she said, "I didn't know where else to go. I only love you. I swear I haven't been with him, or with anyone else, for so long." Her words hit me like a fist to the gut. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But there was this voice in the back of my mind, whispering, reminding me of all the times things hadn't added up, of the inconsistencies, the half-truths. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," I said, my voice colder than I intended. I was trying to protect myself, to put some kind of wall between us. "Maybe it's better if you just go back to your husband." She froze for a moment, like she couldn't believe what she just heard. Then, slowly, she stood up. There was no anger in her face, just this heavy, unbearable sadness that made my chest tighten. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady but sharp enough to cut through me. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll go back. But tell me something, what kind of man walks away from his own child?" Her words landed like a sledgehammer, knocking the wind out of me. My child. Could it really be mine? For months, I'd been plagued by doubt, by questions I didn't dare ask. But now, the possibility, the responsibility, was staring me right in the face. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. I just sat there, paralyzed, as she turned toward the door. And in that moment, watching her walk away, I realized I couldn't let her go, not like this. The first few months after our daughter, Lily, was born felt like a whirlwind. I threw myself into fatherhood with everything I had. I wanted to be the kind of dad who was always there, who could give her the stability and love I never seemed to find in my own childhood. It didn't matter that I was juggling work and late-night diaper changes. I was determined to make it work. But as much as I focused on Lily, it became clear that me wife hadn't changed. Every Friday night, without fail, she'd head out with her friends. At first, I told myself she deserved a break. Being a new mom is tough, and maybe this was her way of coping. But it wasn't just Fridays. Saturdays started falling into the same pattern, and she'd consistently roll in around sunrise. I wanted to believe it was harmless, but her own words betrayed her. One evening, after I asked where she went during these long nights, she confessed with a laugh that she didn't even know some of the people she was partying with. My stomach dropped. What kind of mother leaves her newborn at home to spend nights with strangers? At first, I tried to reason with her. "You can't keep doing this," I told her one morning when she stumbled in, smelling like a mix of alcohol and stale cigarettes. "Lily needs you. I need you." She waved me off, too tired or too indifferent to argue. "You're overreacting," she mumbled. "I just need some time for myself." But as the months turned into years, her behavior didn't improve, it got worse. Sex between us became less and less frequent, and when it did happen, it felt more like a chore than any kind of connection. She started openly criticizing me, calling me boring to my face. "You're just dull," she said one night, her words slurring slightly from the wine she'd been sipping. "We don't even have anything in common. You don't care about the things I love, poetry, theater, film. You're just you." I tried to defend myself, tried to explain that my interests were different, not inferior. "Just because I don't spend my evenings reading Rilke or watching indie flicks doesn't mean I'm not worth talking to," I shot back. She nodded like she agreed, but then, the next day, it was the same story all over again. While Sarah drifted further from me, my bond with Lily only grew stronger. She became the center of my world. I'd wake up early to pack her lunch and braid her hair before school, even though I'd never braided anything in my life before her. I learned the names of all her stuffed animals and read her favorite bedtime stories until she fell asleep, her tiny hand clutching mine. I'd take her to the park on weekends, teaching her how to swing high enough to feel the wind in her face. She'd giggle and shout, "Higher, Daddy! Higher!" Those moments made everything else in my life, Sarah's coldness, her nights out, her endless criticism, fade into the background. At school events, I was the dad who showed up every time, camera in hand, cheering louder than anyone else in the crowd. When Lily drew her first picture of our family, I noticed there were only two figures, her and me. Wife wasn't there. It broke my heart, but I didn't say a word. The cracks in our relationship deepened as my wife became more reckless. Her binges weren't just occasional, they were a regular part of our lives. I'd come home from my job, tired from the 20-mile commute, and find her gone again, leaving Lily with a babysitter. When I confronted her, she'd always have some excuse, some justification that never quite held up. "Who are you even hanging out with?" I demanded one night, my voice rising. "Do you even know these people?" She shrugged, smirking. "They're just people. I don't owe you an explanation." It made my blood boil, but I knew shouting wouldn't change anything. Instead, I poured my energy into being there for Lily, hoping she wouldn't notice the growing distance between her parents. But Sarah's disdain for me only grew. One night, after I'd spent hours helping Lily with a school project, my wife looked at me with a sneer. "You're so predictable," she said. "You're like an old piece of furniture, reliable but lifeless." I tried to laugh it off, but her words stuck with me. One afternoon, I came home to something that instantly set off alarm bells. My wife asked me to show her, on video, no less, how I'd logged out of her Instagram account. The way she asked, all anxious and on edge, made my stomach tighten. Why was she so worried? What did she think I'd seen? Later, when she wasn't around, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I went to Instagram's browser version and found her messages with a friend. That's when a name caught my eye, a filmmaker. My curiosity turned into dread as I searched his profile and saw their conversations. It was chilling how easily the lies came to her, how effortlessly she could deceive me. I felt sick. What kind of man doesn't feel like a fool when he discovers his woman is texting other men behind his back? And it didn't stop there. I found her SMS account, yes, SMS, in 2024, for crying out loud, and saw more conversations with her so-called friends. The more I uncovered, the worse it got. Our relationship had been deteriorating for a while, but this was like pouring gasoline on an already burning fire. Things between us were cold, ice cold. Sex became less frequent, and when it did happen, it felt like we were going through the motions. Then she started casually bringing up that filmmaker, dropping hints about how he was her type. That hit me like a slap in the face. How could she even say something like that to me? It only fueled my suspicions. Her phone became another battleground. She was constantly texting someone but always kept the screen tilted away from me, as if she were guarding a national secret. One Saturday morning, I decided I'd had enough of playing the fool. Without telling her, I showed up at her place unannounced. But she wasn't there. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was deeply wrong. In a desperate move, I tried to find her laptop, thinking I could finally get some answers. But it wasn't there, she'd taken it with her. That alone made my doubts spiral. Why would she take her laptop out for the day? People don't just carry their computers around unless they're hiding something. When she finally called me later that evening, it was almost 7 p.m. Her voice was shaky, uncertain. She told me she'd been at a friend's place the night before, drinking wine by the river. No details, no reassurances, just that vague explanation. And the part that stung the most? She didn't even ask how Lily was doing. Not a single question about her own daughter. I couldn't hold back. I made a scene. I let all my frustration and anger boil over, demanding to know where she'd been and what the hell was going on. She got upset, but not in the way I'd expected. She didn't seem defensive, she seemed almost guilty. She started apologizing profusely, telling me I was overreacting and that we shouldn't fight. "I'll make it up to you," she said softly, like she knew exactly how to smooth things over. And somehow I let her. I let my guard down. We ended up having what felt like make-up loving, though it left a bitter taste in my mouth afterward. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just been played. After that, we took a trip to the mountains, and honestly, it was a great vacation. But then I noticed something strange. Some white discharge appeared on my genitals. I was freaked out. We didn't sleep together again after that. She said it was due to a female issue. Once we were back from the mountains, I decided to check her messages again and found a screenshot from her filmmaker. It said, "If only you knew the kind of happiness you brought me in bed. A bit disappointed that I only managed to take you to the peak of pleasure 3 times in one go. I'm sure your husband does it way more than that." Just to remind you, by this point, we hadn't been intimate for over 2 months. I was stunned. It was hard not to show my feelings, but I acted like nothing was wrong. While she was in the bathroom, I snuck into my phone and took screenshots of those messages to have some proof. I thought about how I could turn this around, making it look like I found them by accident. But then, I decided to check her Telegram. That's when I found a hidden conversation with one of her friends. They were laughing about how they managed to completely mess with my head. Turns out, my daughter Layla, my precious little girl, wasn't even mine. And the father? Guess again. It wasn't me. The real father was her old boyfriend, the philosopher, and he knew all along that Layla was his. She'd forwarded a message from him to her friend saying, "It's so interesting that Layla is my daughter. This will be a fun little experiment, haha." I couldn't believe it. It felt like a bomb went off in my chest. The philosopher was more curious about how I'd react when I found out that everything I thought I knew was a lie. And the worst part? It was someone close to me who did this. I went outside to clear my head, trying to piece everything together. Slowly, it all started making sense. I realized what a calculating snake she was. One thing kept bothering me. While at the hospital, I saw her husband's name on a piece of paper. I remember it clearly. Does that mean? No, it hit me all at once. That's when I realized what she had done. She had tried to trick her husband into thinking Layla was his, but he wasn't as gullible as me. He probably didn't buy her lies and kicked her out. That's when she came to me and spun her web of deceit. I smoked another cigarette to calm myself down, pacing back and forth. When I finally got home, everyone was asleep. I looked at Layla, and it was like I couldn't see her as my daughter anymore. The more I looked at her features, the more they didn't look like mine. I didn't want to see it anymore. I woke up the next morning and told her straight up about the discharge I noticed, making it clear that I hadn't been with anyone else. Her face instantly changed, and she started saying that I wasn't the only one. I told her, "Let me see the messages with your filmmaker. If there's nothing in there, I'll feel better." She handed me the Facebook conversation, but I knew there wouldn't be anything there because all the proof was in the text messages. I said, "Now I'm going to check if he called you." I opened the text messages, and before I could see anything, she snatched my phone and said, "You can't look at that." Then she quickly put the phone down and handed it back to me. But I noticed something. There were 3 messages before, and now there were only 2. I asked her, "Who were you trying to mess with? There was a message in there that proved you were cheating." She didn't say a word, just looked down. I got up and walked away. I didn't say anything about Layla because I didn't want to hurt the little girl. She was innocent, and it wasn't her fault that her mom was a liar. And that's when it all started. I deliberately ignored her calls for the first 3 days, and I ended up with over 200 missed calls. On the first day, she called me every 20 minutes. After that, it slowed down. Then, she sent me videos on Telegram, crying and pleading with me to pick up the phone. I thought she was genuinely upset, so I finally answered. As soon as I did, her voice completely changed, and she seemed fine. It was clear, those tears were just a manipulation tactic. Guys, don't fall for it. She started explaining that she had cheated, saying she just happened to be in a cab one night, passing by the area where he was. He invited her to hang out, bought her wine, and they went for a walk. They stopped by some house, and surprise, he said it was his house. He invited her in, and she, accidentally, went inside. The ultimate victim of bad luck. Then she told me the sex only lasted 10 minutes, and was the most awkward sex she'd ever had. This, even though she got home at 1 in the afternoon. As time went on, her story changed. Now the sex lasted just 5 minutes, and was even worse than she originally claimed. Like 5 minutes. How am I supposed to be mad about that? Then came the excuses that it was my fault because I never stopped her from drinking with random people on Fridays. I told her, "You're not 12, you don't need me to tell you what to do." And then she hit me with the version where she claimed she had realized everything after the affair and now truly understood that she loved me. When I asked her where her love was when she was sleeping with the director, she didn't say anything. Then she started making excuses, saying that all these months she couldn't figure out if we were really in a serious relationship. After the affair, she claimed that she finally realized that we were really in a serious relationship and that we were serious. I asked her how she could justify the fact that we were married. Did it really mean nothing to her? She said that a real man should be able to forgive. I said I would forgive her, but only if she was honest. I asked if she wanted to have a child with me and she said yes, but not now. First she needs to get Layla settled and sort out her own financial situation. I asked again, "Do you want my baby?" She replied, "What about Layla?" I couldn't hold back the tears. I took her hand, looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Sarah, I hate you. Go to hell." She was shocked, but then her expression changed to a judgmental one. She replied, "I always knew you were weaker than I thought. You're not going to do anything anyway, you're not going to find anyone. So bear with me, Pookie. Everything you've read is true. I never loved you. I just used you." I walked into Layla's room and she had already heard everything. She was crying. I sat down next to her, knelt down and asked, "Layla, do you want me to be your father?" She hugged me and said she was afraid she would be alone. I told her, "No, you won't be alone. You won't be anymore." After that, I hurriedly divorced my wife. If I remember correctly, she's now stuck in some kind of squabble with the director. As for Layla, she's with me now, and we've moved to another state. We're building a new life together, and it's much better. I'm thinking about getting full custody of Layla. I'm afraid the monster might show up again. We have things moving forward. I think Layla misses her mom a little bit, but her mom hasn't been in touch. I talked to her a while back after our last meeting and told her I was planning on getting custody of Layla. She said it was all about money, so I think I have a good chance. I am watching your videos now and they have made me feel so much better. Unfortunately, I found your videos already after all this happened. I'm sharing my story here, hoping it will help someone else avoid making the same mistakes I did. And if you decide to publish it, I just want to say to everyone, take care of your loved ones and make the most of the time you have, like I did with my beautiful Layla.